Welcome to the educational research section of www.happynumbers.org. Today's video will deal with the concept of internal validity. Internal validity, the ability to say with a high degree of probability that it is the independent variable, the treatment or the intervention, that has caused the change in the dependent variable. And actually what we're going to take a look at today are there are standard threats to internal validity, and you should be aware of these standard threats when you're reading research articles, pardon me, because it will help you in your analysis of the research article and your critique of it. All right, let's take a look at then internal validity. Definition. Internal validity refers to the condition that observed differences on the dependent variable, what's being measured, are a direct result of manipulation of the independent variable and not some other variable or confound. A research study that has very good internal validity or experimental control sort of rules out alternative explanations, rules out confounding variables or alternative explanations for the results. We can say then with a high degree of probability that it was the independent variable or the treatment that has caused the change in the dependent variable. That's internal validity. And then there are the three terms: internal validity, experimental control, and if we've established a functional relation, these all mean basically the same thing. That we can say with a high degree of probability that the independent variable has caused the change in the dependent variable. Of course, researchers are always trying to increase the internal validity of their research. And so maximization of internal validity requires exercise of very rigid control over subjects and conditions in a laboratory-like environment. All right, so there are some standardized threats that have been identified, and so we're going to then go over them. I think there are about 8 or 9 of them. The first threat, standard threat to internal validity, is called history. And history refers to the occurrence of any event that takes place during the life of the experiment, which is not part of the experimental treatment or the intervention, and which may affect the outcome of the experiment. So basically, history is changes in the environment or ecology of the experimental setting. Bomb scare, fire drill, epidemic of measles, flu. At the school that I teach at now, about 3 or 4 years ago, we had a flood. The school was flooded and we had to split the school day in half and all kinds of things. But that would have been, and if we were doing research, that would have been a historical threat to the internal validity. The key concept with history is that it refers to changes in the experimental environment. The experimental environment. So that threat is history. The next threat, maturation, refers to changes in the physical or mental changes of the participants in the experiment. So maturation refers to physical or mental changes that may occur within the subjects or participants in the experiment, not the ecology or the environment of the experiment. So subjects may get older, they may become more coordinated or less coordinated, they may become unmotivated, may become more motivated, become anxious, bored, a whole bunch of things. They may undergo rapid biological changes. My wife teaches the 6th grade, and it's a pivotal year, the changes between when a student enters into the 6th grade and when they leave 6th grade to go to 7th grade. There could be quite a few changes that go on. Those are maturational changes. Changes that take place during the participants, to the participants during the length of the experiment. Another threat, standardized threat to internal validity, is called testing. If the research is using pre-test and post-test or multi-test, what effects do taking multiple tests have on the performance? Does it increase the performance? If taking a pre-test and post-test if the post-test score improves, how can we tease out that taking the pre-test didn't assist in having the post-test score improve? And it's especially a threat if there is a short time period between pre-test and post-test, and if the test measures factual information that can be easily recalled. So this threat is testing. So when you're reading research articles, and if they're using pre and post tests, then you want to consider, is there a possible testing effect that threatens the internal validity? The next one is instrumentation, and it refers to unreliability or lack of consistency in the measuring instrument, which may result in an invalid assessment of the performance in the dependent variable. Examples: if a piece of research is using two different tests as pre and post tests, what's the result if the tests are not of equal difficulty? Another example of instrumentation is if you have people collecting direct observational data, so you have an observer. Over time, observers tend to become bored or lax, and they tend to drift. And so has the researcher, if the researcher is using direct observation, has the researcher have inter-rater or inter-scorer reliability? By the way, there is a video on inter-rater and inter-scorer reliability. If those terms are not common knowledge to you, you may want to look at it. The calibration of the mechanical devices may be incorrect. My dissertation, I developed software to collect direct observational data by remote control, by a remote control device about the size of a credit card that the teacher could carry around in their pocket. In fact, the computer did not even have to be in their room. It could be somewhere else. But when we were testing at a school for autism in Princeton, New Jersey, about 8 of the counselors were using it, but one was getting very, very erratic scores, and we couldn't figure it out. And so finally I sat down with her and said, I want you to show me exactly what you're doing. And so she put the device on a metal radiator, and the radiator interfered. So my point is the calibration there was interfered with, and so that became a threat, and it was a threat in instrumentation. Another one that we need to be very careful is poor survey construction. A survey is a data collection instrument, and surveys are very difficult to construct. So if a survey is constructed poorly, there could be a threat to internal validity that would fall under the category of instrumentation. The next one is called differential selection of subjects. And this is when already formed groups are used, like classes, and there is an initial difference between the groups that may partially affect the scores. So we know that randomization of subjects is best. And we'd like to avoid already existing groups when possible, because the groups may be different to start out with, and that may be the threat, the differential selection threat. If we have to use groups, we want to try and select groups that are as similar as possible. We want to try and match subjects. And one way we can counteract the differential selection of subjects threat is if we can pre-test the groups for initial equivalence. So, using existing classrooms or existing neighborhoods or existing hospitals or any type of class like that where we can't randomize, we leave the research may be subject to differential selection of subjects' threat to internal validity, and the researchers should try and address that. Attrition or mortality is a typical one. Subjects drop out of the study for whatever reasons. And we need to keep in mind that sometimes subjects drop out. They may drop out for the same reason. Let's say there's a clique, a group of people that are very friendly, and one of them drops out, and then their other friends drop out, and that could have an effect on the study. So attrition or mortality, if you're getting subjects, if you're going to do a piece of research, try and get more participants than you think you will need, because attrition generally rears its ugly head. Selection, maturation, interaction is another standard threat. And again, if already formed groups are used, one group may profit more or less from a treatment or have an initial advantage because of maturation, history, or testing factors. Suppose we had two classes. One was a GATE class, and the other was just your typical class. Well, and we're going to test mathematical ability. Well, we can assume that the gate class may go in with a head start, and so that selection, maturation, interaction may present a threat. And the final one is called statistical regression, and that is the tendency of participants who score high on a pretest to score lower on a post-test, or vice versa. And statistically, scores tend to regress or move towards the mean score. So people who score high on one test, their score on the second test will probably move a little bit towards the mean. Probably a little bit towards the mean. So statistical regression, just the fact of statistical regression, may really influence the results, and we need to be aware of that. Okay, brief review. Internal validity, we can say with a high, if it has good internal validity, we can say that an independent variable basically caused the change, or with a high degree of probability we can make that statement. Experimental control and functional relation are synonymous with internal validity, and here are our threats to internal validity. And these are important. When you're reading research articles, you should be aware of these and see how the researchers have dealt with them. We have history, which is changes in the experimental environment; maturation, which is changes in the participants, something happens to the participants during the experiment; testing, what does the influence of repeated testing have on final scores; instrumentation, are the instruments used valid and reliable; differential selection of subjects has to do with we're using existing groups. Has the researcher tried to make the groups equivalent, or at least is the researcher aware that the groups may have been inequivalent? Attrition or mortality when subjects leave. Selection, maturation, interaction. There may be, in the groups that are, the classes or existing groups that are used, there may be some built-in differences that we were unaware of or the researcher was unaware of. And statistical regression. That is the tendency of scores to move towards a mean score. Well, okay, these are threats to internal validity. Again, it's important to have these in mind when you're reading research articles. And if you're going to do your own research, you're going to sort of have to try and be able to counteract these threats. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.